There are some people in life who seem to have a natural affinity for certain things, an ability to pick up something new very quickly and naturally and excel at it as though they were born to do it. There's even a common idiom that explains it. They took to it like a duck to water. Whether it's a knack for arts and crafts, the ability to just get maths and do it in their heads, or being a natural athlete, we all know that one person who is incredibly, almost effortlessly skilled in their field. Quite often, they've made it their profession. It can be frustrating for the rest of us mere mortals who have to work so very hard to be good at that same thing. At least, that's what I thought, until I found that thing that I took to, just like a duck to water. Now, as someone who isn't particularly creative, and someone who is most definitely not a maths megamind, I happen to find my natural ability in sport. Not swimming, running, or not a team game that you'd find being played in schoolyards. No. I found my natural ability in the sport of horseback archery. A sport most ardently followed in Russia, Mongolia, China, Japan, and South Korea. It's uncommon outside those countries, so most people don't know it exists. They usually haven't even heard of it. My introduction to horse archery was rocky, to say the least. It started with a fall. I've been riding horses my whole life. I could ride a horse long before I could walk, and if you are a rider, or you know a rider, you'll be aware that injuries are common. They're typically not too serious, and the odds of incurring a dire injury are thankfully reasonably low. Unfortunately for me, I've always been one for beating the odds. In January of 2016, I had a fall. I broke my leg and I had a snapped rib. That rogue rib shard lacerated my liver. I was bleeding out internally in the emergency room, but initially, no one even realised. It was thanks to an army nurse who had just returned from a deployment to Afghanistan that I'm here today. I narrowly avoided a liver transplant. I was 13. After time and care in the hospital, I was wheeling my way around in style in my shiny new wheelchair on the road to recovery. But the fall had made me question my sport, and I didn't know what riding would look like for me in the future. What I didn't know was that the fall would lead me to a sport that I hadn't even known existed. While wheeling around a local market in Brisbane with my ever-patient mother, I spotted a stall selling archery gear. I wheeled up and popped my wheelchair brakes on to take a look. The owner asked me what I'd done to myself. I explained that I'd fallen off my horse, training for dressage. Not show jumping or eventing, dressage. He smiled. I said something off the cuff like, if I'm gonna fall off my horse, I'd rather it was doing something exciting. He smiled and said, you do know you can do archery on horseback. My mum says this is the moment when my eyes lit up in wonder. I asked him to confirm. You can? He nodded. I turned to my mum and asked, you can? She gave a non-verbal response that was half a nod and half a look of someone who knew her life was about to become infinitely more complicated. Real mum's taxi stuff. A very quick Google search introduced me to the exciting, daring, precise, and highly demanding sport that is horse archery. I was immediately hooked. 5 months after my accident, my bones and liver were healed, and my rehab was complete. The first thing that I did upon receiving a clean bill of health was get myself and my gorgeous horse to a local horse archery instructor. You wouldn't believe how hard they can be to find. There were only 2 in Australia at the time, and how lucky I was to find one so close to home. Well, when I say close, I mean, a 3-hour drive each way, every week, with Mum behind the wheel. The day that I met my first ever instructor, the woman who would go on to become my coach, was the first day that I ever picked up a bow and arrow. I got really good at it, really fast. Just 16 months later, I was a gold medalist in the team event at the World Championships in South Korea. I was 15 and competing against grown adults who had spent decades honing their skills, sometimes their entire lives. I also won the Australian Nationals titles for the first time in 2017 before going on to defend it in 2018 and 2019, while still attending high school. I received offers to train overseas with the best archers in the world. There were offers of sponsorships, contracts, and interviews with global media outlets. In the countries where people knew me and they followed the sport, people knew what I was doing and they loved it. Well, mostly. There was the occasional moment when one of my competitors didn't love the antics of, or losing, to the young Australian upstart. One example immediately comes to mind. It was at the World Championships in South Korea, and in this sport, there's a whole series of different events and age categories. And if you're a junior, like I was, a lot of the events are deemed too dangerous for us to compete in. So if you are a junior, there can be a lot of downtime. You can't really have a lot of in-depth conversations with the juniors from other countries because language is a barrier. On the international horse archery scene, English is not the dominant language. And unfortunately for me, that's the only language that I spoke. So I spent a lot of time looking and watching what people were doing, getting glimpses into their culture, but also watching how they trained. The different styles of archery and horse riding were amazing. One day, I happened to walk past a training shed where a late 20-something Mongolian rider was training. He was standing on this moving mechanical horse-type contraption. Think like a gymnastic-style horse, but one that moves. I had never seen one before. I had certainly never been on one before. He looked pretty stable. He was standing on 2 feet, using his arms and hands to balance himself. I thought, wow, that's cool. I would love to be able to do that. So I waited for him to finish. When he'd left, I took my chance to give it a go. I got on the horse, the machine started to move, and I quickly mastered standing on 2 legs. You see, I have this natural affinity to watch someone do something and then recreate it. But then I like to take it a step further. So the next time I got on that mechanical horse, I took my archery gear with me. There were targets just a few feet away. It'd be wrong not to. I was standing, the machine started to move, and I started shooting. I was hitting the targets easily. So when that became too easy, I decided to try it with 1 foot slightly elevated, leaving only 1 foot keeping me grounded to the mechanical horse. Still I shot, and still my arrows hit their target. It was around this time that people started to gather. First a few, then a few more. At some point, my mum discovered where I'd gotten to and brought out her phone to start recording. When the slightly elevated foot got too easy, I decided to move that leg further and further away from my body, increasing the difficulty of both maintaining my balance and managing my bow. By this time, word had clearly spread around the training camp because more and more people arrived. 2 very experienced Cossack riders moved their way right to the front of the crowd in front of my mother and her camera to capture footage of the young Australian upstart.
Straight through the middle of it.
Watch out, boys.
In truth, it was all a bit surreal. In this very niche community, I was doing something impressive and respected, and I was on a high. Until I wasn't. It's hard to explain, but just as quickly as I had fallen in love with horse archery, I fell out of love with it. I loved the process of learning how to do it. I loved learning that I was not only good, but great at it. I loved the travel, meeting new people, and experiencing new cultures. And I loved how proud it made my mum to see me excel. But having reached the pinnacle of the sport so quickly, and to some extent, so easily, I was done. The passion was gone. I wasn't learning new things. I felt an immense sense of guilt about these feelings. Guilt about the other competitors who had trained for years and who struggled to accomplish every goal and who never complained about it being boring. Guilt about the victories that came so easily to me. Guilt that those victories meant less and less every year. Guilt about the trainers and coaches who had spent their time and effort coaching me. And guilt about my mum, who had spent her time and her money invested into supporting me. I started quietly mentioning to people that I was thinking of leaving. They thought I was insane. Leaving a sport at the top of my game with offers on the table. And just as I had feared, the reactions of some of the people that I greatly respected made me feel that I was letting them down. At least, that's how I felt. But my mum was amazing. As much as she clearly wanted me to continue, okay, she was devastated by my decision. She supported me in it, and that made all the difference. Since retiring from horseback archery, I graduated high school, and I'm now a proud member of the Royal Australian Air Force, where I'm learning to be an aircraft technician. I'm learning new things, challenging things that I'm not necessarily taking to like a duck to water, but things that I believe are important and purposeful, and that makes me happy. If you're lucky enough to discover that thing that you take to, just like a duck to water, remember, do it while you love it, for as long as you love it. When it's no longer your passion, don't feel that you're chained to it and have to continue to do it. Don't be afraid to step back and change direction. You don't have to do something just because you're good at it, or even great at it, or because other people expect you to. Find that next thing to love and chase it.